World powers have agreed to try to implement a ceasefire in Syria and to expand the delivery of humanitarian aid to people caught up in the conflict. The announcement comes after marathon talks in Munich that included the US and Russia and more than a dozen other countries. Anne Barker reports.
It looks and sounds momentous, but those who've signed the communiqué in Munich know the talk may not translate into reality.
What we have here are words on paper. What we need to see in the next few days are actions on the ground in the field.
US Secretary of State John Kerry at a midnight press conference said there was unanimous support for a ceasefire in Syria and the provision of humanitarian aid.
We have agreed to implement a nationwide cessation of hostilities to begin in a target of 1 week's time. That's ambitious, but everybody is determined to move as rapidly as possible to try to achieve this. This will apply to any and all parties in Syria, with the exception of the terrorist organizations Daesh and al-Nusra.
The delivery of desperately needed humanitarian aid will begin immediately.
First, to the areas where it is most urgently needed: Deir ez-Zor, Fuad, Kafraya, the besieged areas of rural Damascus, Madaya, Muthimiyah, Kafir Batna, and then to all the people in need throughout the country, particularly in the besieged or hard-to-reach areas.
Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov agreed the task of achieving a ceasefire will be difficult.
I want to repeat, I fully agree with John that the real test of strength, it will be how we will fulfill what we have agreed upon in full volume and not just in those components which are convenient to just one group or out of the participants of the support group of Syria.
Crucially, of course, Syria wasn't part of the talks in Munich, and it's impossible to believe Bashar al-Assad's regime will in any way respect the ceasefire, especially as Syrian forces backed by Russian airstrikes continue over Aleppo. And even if Syria did agree, the situation on the ground is likely to deteriorate even further before the ceasefire would take effect. The United Nations Special Envoy on Syria, Staffan de Mistura, says the Syrian people have the most basic needs.
The first one was, please don't have another conference as the others, and don't have just a conference about talking about talks, but please give us two things. One is humanitarian access. We are human beings. We deserve to get food, water, access to medical facilities. And second, we need no more bombs, no more war.
The outcome in Munich coincides with separate talks in Brussels that will likely see an acceleration in airstrikes against Islamic State. 60 nations have been meeting at NATO headquarters to discuss a US plan to ramp up the military campaign. The US predicts at least 24 countries will agree to the plan. Crucially, Saudi Arabia, a key US ally, has agreed to increase its military contributions and expand its role in the air campaign. US Defence Secretary Ash Carter welcomed the news after talks with the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman.
Saudi Arabia's defense minister, for example, indicated that the kingdom is reinvigorating its commitment to the coalition air campaign, which is very welcome news, and contributing in other critical ways on the ground.
But that's prompted an angry response from Russia, which has warned of perpetual war if Saudi Arabia launches a ground offensive in Syria. Saudi Arabia supports rebel groups in Syria, while Russia is backing the Syrian government. The Russian Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev has told a German newspaper an escalation in the conflict could unleash a new world war. Russia has also blamed American forces for bombing 2 hospitals in Aleppo. The US State Department spokesman is Mark Toner.
Categorically can say there were no airstrikes in and around Aleppo yesterday or today.
So the Russians are lying when they say that.
That's your characterization, not mine, but we've seen this kind of disinformation circulate before, and not just on Syria.
The war of words only underscores the difficulty of Russia, the US and other nations of brokering any kind of peace in Syria.
Anne Barker